2011 was a year of many highs and many lows. What were the highlights of the year? Who were the newsmakers, and what are some of those events that shaped the year 2011?
Indeed, it was a year that had both positive and negative changes for individuals as well as the country as a whole.
Happy New Year to you. My name is Bill Odidi.
And my name is Melin Miendo. A very happy New Year to you. Now let's go over to the year in review from KBC Channel 1. 2011 was the year the 6 post-election violence suspects were summoned to the International Criminal Court to listen to the charges against them, with Kenyans waiting with bated breath for the outcome. There were misconceptions and assumptions, with rumors flying around that the 6 would not come back home. Our reporter Wangari Kanyongo traveled to The Hague and files the chronology of events that have happened at the court this year.
The International Criminal Court moved the Kenyan case forward on March 8, 2011 by issuing summonses for 6 individuals accused of crimes against humanity during the post-election violence in 2008. The 6 were summoned to appear for initial proceedings in The Hague on April the 7th. 3 summonses were issued in each of 2 related cases, following requests by the ICC prosecutor in December last year. In the first case, William Samoei Ruto, Henry Kiprono Kosgei, and Joshua Arap Sang were accused of committing the crimes against humanity of murder, forcible transfer, and persecution by their involvement in a plan to attack perceived supporters of PNU. In the second case, Francis Kiremi Muthaura, Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, and Mohamed Hussein Ali were accused of committing the crimes against humanity of murder, forcible transfer, rape, other inhumane acts, and persecution by using the Mungiki to attack perceived Orange Democratic Movement supporters in Nakuru and Naivasha, or by instructing the police not to interfere with these attacks. The pre-trial chamber found that summonses were sufficient to ensure that the named individuals appeared before the court, and thus arrest warrants were not necessary at this time. At the same time, government officials had traveled to the United Nations in New York to press for a suspension of the ICC proceedings on Kenya, claiming that the ICC prosecutions were potentially divisive, but Kenya eventually lost the case. As April drew closer, the country was abuzz with assumptions of The Hague, with rumors spreading that the 6 stood a chance of not coming back home when they traveled to The Hague. And then came the D-Day, and the suspects, accompanied by a horde of supporters, left the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. 8 hours later, at the Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, the Kenyan flag could be spotted miles away as the Kenyan group made its way through. Day 1 at the court, a welcome party was ironically singing patriotic songs to show solidarity for the 3 suspects of the first case, as William Ruto, Henry Kosgei, and Joshua Arap Sang made their way to court. Shortly after, the proceedings began before judges Ekaterina Trandafilova, Judge Hans Peter Cole, and Kuno Trafusa. The charges were read to each of them, and day 1 ended. Next day at 2:30 p.m., Uhuru Kenyatta, Francis Muthaura, and Major Hussein Ali had their turn in front of the judges, where they listened to what the prosecutor had built up against them. After the summonses to appear, the cases had to be confirmed to ascertain whether they would go to trial, and the dates were set for September. When the 6 came back home, the welcome party at the airport was overwhelming, causing a major traffic snarl-up in major roads in the city. All roads on this day led to the Uhuru Park, where a mammoth crowd was waiting to welcome the suddenly turned heroes back home. In June, an application challenging the admissibility of cases against the 6 was thrown out by the ICC pre-trial chamber 2, saying that Kenya had not shown any indication of investigating any of the 6 suspects awaiting confirmation of judges' hearings. And so in September, the 6 were again expected at The Hague to find out whether their cases would go to trial. The office of the prosecutor presented evidence, hoping to persuade pre-trial chamber judges to confirm the charges against William Ruto, Henry Kosgei, and radio broadcaster Joshua Arap Sang in the first case. The defense also began making their submissions, hoping to convince the judges why the case against their clients should not go to trial. The defense of the three tore into the prosecutor's evidence, reminding the chamber that the prosecutor bears the burden of demonstrating substantial grounds to warrant a trial and insisting that Ocampo had not met that burden. When the second case began 3 weeks later, the prosecution explained the existence of an alleged organizational policy, saying Muthaura and Kenyatta created a common plan to retaliate against members of the ODM who had attacked supporters of the PNU after elections had been stolen from them. The structure, according to the prosecution, involved the Mungiki group and the Kenyan police. Ali, on his part, allegedly used his position as police commissioner to implement the policy by abiding by Muthaura's directives not to interfere. Supported by several witnesses, the defense teams poked holes in the prosecution to the extent of terming some of the evidence as blatant lies against their clients. Finally, the hearings concluded, with the judges expected to rule on the outcome 60 days after receiving final submissions of the cases. And in October 27th, the court decided it will make a simultaneous ruling on whether the two Kenyan cases shall proceed to trial. However, Judge Trendafilova did not give a date for when the simultaneous decisions can be expected. And so, as this year clocks to an end, Kenyans are yet again awaiting important news from The Hague. News that will determine how politics ahead of the 2012 general elections will shape up. Wangari Kanyongo reporting for Channel 1 Year in Review.
The country is gearing up for an election that will be one of a kind in the history of independent Kenya next year. Though the exact date on which the country goes to the polls remains contentious at the moment, this year saw heightened political activity in preparation for the 2012 election. Lilian Mwendo brings us the busy year in politics as we look back at 2011 and how that might impact in the coming year.
Being the eve year to the country's next election, 2011 saw reasonable political activity. But even as the country prepared for an election of a kind in the history of independent Kenya, the exact date of the election remained contentious.
Wengine wanasema August election, wengine sijui December. Lakini sisi tunasema, let's be realistic.
Debate raged over the year on whether to hold next year's election in the second week of August as provided in the new constitution or in the third week of December.
Wameanza kusema wanataka ukarabati na kuunga mkono George Mchai. Election must be there in August.
The push for the December date saw Justice and Constitutional Affairs Minister Mutula Kilonzo present the Constitutional Amendment Bill 2011, seeking to amend the Constitution to shift the election date from August to December.
Mbona tuanza kuvunja katiba brand new? Hata hatujajaribu kutekeleza. Tukivunja hiyo ya date, tukiona kama mchezo, kesho watavunja kitu muhimu.
I'm dealing with the practicality. I leave the politics, the law, the morality, the vitu vingine. I leave them to you.
The move prompted CIC and former Electoral Commission IEC to petition the Supreme Court for an interpretation of the Constitution concerning the election date. The Supreme Court refused to rule on the matter, referring it to the High Court. The High Court will give a ruling on the 13th of January next year. Legislators are also expected to start debate on the Constitutional Amendment Bill early next year, which, if passed, will amend the election date to December 2012.
We don't want to hear any proposal from the cabinet, and if it comes to parliament, it shall never see the light of the day.
Even as the uncertainty surrounding the election date heightened during the year, those intending to participate in the presidential race come 2012 declared their intentions. Gashoka MP Mutava Musyimi, unlike the rest, went all the way to Nakuru where he launched his presidential bid. Gishugu Member of Parliament Martha Karua, who had announced her candidature earlier, took the opportunity in the year to also launch her bid.
Miss Martha Karua! Yeah! Twajitokeza! Twajitokeza!
The year saw former Rarieda MP Rafael Tuju join the presidential race, unveiling his manifesto in a low-key launch in Nairobi.
Nikipata nafasi kuwa president wa nchi hii, nitahakikisha kwamba kila mtoto, hata ikiwa hawezi kuendelea na shule kwa vile ameanguka mtihani, awe kuna talent academies ambao wanaweza kusaidiwa wa develop new talent yao.
Tuju embarked on a campaign trail to popularize himself across the country. He, however, faced an unfortunate incident in Kisumu where his convoy was attacked by stone-throwing youths.
We would like to condemn the hooliganism that we saw in Kisumu. And we are challenging the Prime Minister, wherever he is, to come out and condemn that violence.
2011 also saw entry of newcomers into the presidential race.
My knowledge outside the country, having worked with those people outside, puts me in a better position than the current presidents or the current leaderships.
Different changes in political parties in readiness for 2012 have been recorded. It was an uphill affair for ODM, with rebel members leaving the party led by Eldoret North MP William Ruto to join UDM. The political arena saw the formation of the G7 alliance following the ban of the KKK after claims that it was a tribal outfit. ODM Kenya changed its name to the Wiper Democratic Movement. With the implementation of the new constitution taking the limelight during the year, political campaigns have been low-keyed, but as we enter the election year 2012, campaigns are expected to reach fever pitch, especially after a decision is reached on the exact date of the election. Lillian Mwendo for the 2011 year in review.
It was an eventful year that saw more pain than tranquil. It is a year that saw Kenya and indeed the whole world robbed of an iconic environmentalist and Nobel Peace Prize winner, Professor Wangari Maathai. It is a year in which many starved due to a prolonged drought never seen in 6 decades. Judith Akolo brings you the events that saw the free flow of tears within and without.
September 2011 got the dubious accolade of being the jinxed month, initially hailed by August. The month witnessed the deaths of over 100 people when a fuel leak from the Kenya Pipeline Company tanks burst into flames, and the ensuing inferno, 100 lives of inhabitants of the Sinai slum built on top of the oil pipes and the reserve land that border the Kenya Pipeline Company were lost.
Mafuta mimi nikakam, but leo imetoka diesel, huaga inatoka super sometimes so leo imetoka diesels, so tukakaa na mtungi, so akaanza kuchota maadhi nini, so abruptly tu, and then unajua hiyo sewage hapo nani kuna steam organs zimepita huko chini ya sewage. I think kuna ile steam zinaonga zimepita huko ndani ndio zililupuka, so ile mimi nikikam nikasikia mlupuko ile kutokea, nikakuwa na shock, nikakimbia.
The huge fire never seen before in Kenya's history also saw many victims burnt and others displaced in the incident. In the aftermath, many literally clinging on dear life were taken to the Kenyatta National Hospital. The loss was so great that the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon expressed sorrow and sympathy for the victims of the Sinai fire. Before the tears could dry and the wounds heal, Kenya lost a renowned environmentalist, Nobel laureate, Professor Wangari Maathai. Professor Maathai succumbed to a long-drawn battle with ovarian cancer on the 25th September 2011. Born on the 1st April 1940, Professor Wangari Maathai had fought many a war in saving the forests and the environment through her non-governmental organization, the Green Belt Movement. Her death threw the whole world into mourning, and those who had underestimated the Nobel laureate were awed by the avalanche of condolence messages as world leaders mourned the death of the iconic figure that straddled the global environmental scene like a colossus. Among her many milestones was founding the Green Belt movement that not only addressed the environment issue but inculcated the need to observe democracy and democratic principles while fighting corruption in society and in the environment sector. In 1986, Wangari was awarded the Right Livelihood Award, and in 2004, she became the first African woman to receive the Nobel Peace Prize for her contribution to sustainable development, democracy, and peace. She also served as Member of Parliament for Tetu and Assistant Minister for Environment and Natural Resources between January 2003 and November 2005. And so, when Professor Wangari Maathai took the last bow, it was the tears that flowed freely from such dignitaries as Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa that showed just how the daughter of Kenya had become loved the world over. September once more saw the death of scores of people who had consumed contaminated illegal liquor in Nyahururu, Roiro, and Kiambu areas of Central Province. Some lost their eyesight as the methanol savaged their cornea, rendering them blind. 2011 witnessed the suffering of yet more people as the construction industry got a beating when buildings, some under construction, simply caved in, and with them, lives were lost, while others were maimed. The main blame was the use of substandard material in the construction of the buildings, while others simply did not comply with the building codes.
So people are getting desperate. And the other part of it is greed, sheer greed. People rushing to try and put up structures. You find some are already beginning to put up structures. The law says you cannot go onto a fifth floor. Beyond fifth floor, that means even if it is 5.5 stories, you're supposed to have a lift. You'll find people want to build structures going 6 stories high, 7 stories high.
An underwater earthquake in the Pacific Ocean that measured some 8.9 on the Richter scale resulted in one of the worst tsunamis ever to happen in living history. Many could not believe as the wall of water as high as 10 meters swamped large parts of the Japanese coastal towns, including Sendai City, covering them in water and mud. And when the Cosmo oil refinery in Chiba Prefecture outside Tokyo exploded, to some it appeared as though the Armageddon had finally come and only Noah's Ark could save their skin. The fighters were unable to contain the inferno. In the ensuing melee, thousands were dead, many more displaced, and yet so many others were reported missing. For Year in Review, I'm Judith Akolo.
The year 2011 has seen the country endure a host of tragedies, ranging from fires to those occasioned by the consumption of illicit brews. It was a cycle of tragedies that demonstrated the sheer level of ignorance exhibited by some Kenyans who appear ready to disregard precedents, lessons that could otherwise have saved their lives. Our reporter Caroline Kamau takes us through some of these horrific events of the year, recounting episodes exhibited by some Kenyans due to sheer folly.
It is a year that saw accidents and accidents day after day. Just when Kenyans thought that the jinx had been buried, more Kenyans perished on roads through road accidents, bringing the figure to 3,000. Haliganagade brings us highlights on the accidents in 2011.
Early in January this year, 10 people were killed in a grisly road accident near Limuru on the Nairobi-Nakuru highway on an early Sunday morning. The accident also left close to 40 others nursing serious injuries, and this is after the driver of a Kakamega-bound passenger bus tried to overtake a saloon car but lost control of the vehicle, causing it to roll several times before landing in a ditch. 7 months later, in July, former Voi Member of Parliament Boniface Mganga was killed in a road accident on the Nairobi-Mombasa highway when his vehicle rammed into a stationary truck near Manyani GK prison. The month of August saw also 10 people perishing in yet another road crash along the Meru-Chuka highway. And here, the Prime Minister Raila Odinga pointed an accusing finger to the traffic police officers, saying police officers were not keen to implement traffic regulations and were instead using roadblocks to extort money from motorists.
We need to be more careful in our roads.
And in the same month, at least 23 people were killed when the driver of the bus they were traveling in lost control and plunged into a river in Booni East District. Police said 34 others sustained injuries and were admitted to hospitals in Booni, Machakos and Makueni districts. 19 others were treated and discharged. The passengers were allegedly traveling from Makueni to Kangundo for dowry negotiations when the accident occurred. Shocking enough is the statistics that Nairobi loses at least 3 people daily in road accidents that occur on various roads of the capital, mainly pedestrians, according to the police reports. And in December this year, 8 people, including a child, died after their Akamba bus collided with a tanker ferrying paraffin near Makindu. The bus was bound for Mombasa while the truck was heading towards Nairobi when they collided between Masimba and Kiboko, about 30 kilometers from Makindu town. According to the traffic commandant Joseph Oletito, the main contributor to the road crashes in the country is the rapid increase of motor vehicles. The traffic boss pointed to the recent increase of motorcycles as one reason for the rise in road accidents in the country.
It was an eventful year that saw many Kenyans lose their lives on the Kenyan roads, and this also resulted into accusations and counter-accusations that were flowing left, right and center.
Haligan Agade for the NDR Review.
They say hard work pays, and these words have proved authentic to the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation after various prestigious awards were won over the past 1 year, ranging from the Tourism Awards to those recognizing the corporation's efforts in the promotion of the Kiswahili language. The year 2011 witnessed a host of KBC producers and editors bagging various awards and further cementing the fact that the national broadcaster remains truthful to its mandate and ideals of entertaining and informing the public. Channel 1's Mark Otieno takes us through these moments of pride.
Now, the year 2011 has been rewarding to the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation as it saw hard-working journalists being recognized and awarded for their outstanding performances. One such outstanding award was the first ever Kenya Tourism Award, which was scooped by the station's Irene Muchuma, who was recognized for her Magical Scenes program that runs every Wednesday. The TV program showcases scenic sites within Kenya, hence promoting tourism in the country.
Irene Chuma.
And the winner is Irene Chuma.
According to Muchuma, her inspiration and dedication to promote Kenya stems from her desire to highlight the rich diversity in the country. Yet another remarkable feat was seen in the Tuzo ya Wasta Kiswahili Awards presented to the acting editor-in-chief Ngulamu Mwaviru in recognition for KBC's consistent efforts in promoting Kiswahili language through the station's Jamvi La Lugha TV program. News anchor Badi Muhsin and sports commentator Jack Oyo Sylvester were also honored alongside Ngulamu Mwaviru for their outstanding work in contribution to the growth of Kiswahili. And during the Victoria Awards, KBC TV's Dunda Kikwetu scooped the first overall award in the TV category. The awards are the first to recognize and promote local musicians and their music. Geoffrey Onditi and Nura Nagayo of KBC Production Services were not left out in the year 2011 as they were recognized for being the best radio journalist during the Kenya Media Network Population and Development Awards. During the same award ceremony, Deka Hassan of KBC Somali Station scooped the first runners-up in the vernacular category on combating female genital mutilation. Caroline Musheru, formerly of Metro FM, was the second runners-up in the reproductive health and rights category. The Kalasha Awards also saw KBC's Vioja Mahakamani recognized for entertainment. And during the end-year party for the station, Rufus Hunja was feted for being the best employee and for his exemplary performance. And finally, KBC was recognized for supporting and upholding peace during the annual International Day of Peace celebrated on the 24th of September. Marco Tieno, reporting for Channel 1.
Several people were charged at the Chief Magistrate's Court with charges varying from stealing, robbery with violence and murder. But what made 2011 was the self-confessed member of Al-Shabaab. Elgiva Bwire pleaded guilty to being a member of Al-Shabaab and was handed a life imprisonment. In the High Court, 2 men charged with the killing of former Gatundu North Member of Parliament Patrick Meruri was sentenced to death. Our court reporter Zuya Walter is next with stories that made highlights from the corridors of justice.
January this year, Tendereti Member of Parliament Henry Kosgei found himself in the dock facing 11 counts of abuse of office. It is alleged that he used his office to improperly confer a benefit to various individuals and companies by exempting 113 imported vehicles from the application of Kenya Bureau of Standards Codes of Practice. However, the case was put on hold after the High Court declared the trial invalid, saying the prosecutor Patrick Kiage was prosecuting the case illegally as his contract had expired. And in June, FIDA and 5 other women lobby groups moved to court following the Judicial Service Commission's JSC nomination of the 5 judges to serve in the Supreme Court, arguing that the nominations did not reflect gender balance. However, the court dismissed the case on ground that the appointment of the judges had not breached the Constitution. The Supreme Court judges were sworn in office following the ruling. The 5 judges include Justice Philip Tunoi, Justice Jackton Ojwang, Justice Ibrahim Muhammad, Dr. Smoking Wanjala, and Ms. Njoki Ndungu. Meanwhile, High Court Judge Muhammad Wasame sentenced to death Police Inspector Dickson Munene and his friend Alex Chepkonga for the murder of James Nganga. The country has not witnessed any executions since 1987 when Ezekiel Ochuka and Pakris Oteyo Okumu, both accusing of plotting the August 1st, 1982 coup, were given capital sentence. Nambale Member of Parliament Chris Okemo and former Kenya Power and Lighting Company boss Samuel Gishuru also had their day in court as they sought to challenge their extradition to Jersey. The two are wanted in Jersey Island, UK, to answer money laundering and corruption charges. They are accused of a 900 million shillings fraud and receiving bribes from the international companies between 1992 and 2002. And Gatundu North Member of Parliament Clement Kungu Waivara was a lucky man after the Court of Appeal overturned a High Court order that nullified his election. The MP had lost his seat in August this year when the High Court Judge Fred Ocheng sent him packing. In the petition, Bernard Shege Mburu had moved to court to challenge the 2007 election of Waibara as Gatundu North MP. And as the country prepared for the festive season, a landmark ruling was delivered by High Court Judge Nicholas Ombija in November. The judge ruled that Kenya should arrest Sudan President al-Bashir if he ever steps in the country. And even after the AG moved to the Court of Appeal to challenge the ruling, the appellate judges declined to issue temporary orders stopping the execution of the High Court ruling. And as the Kenya military commenced its operation against Al-Shabaab in Somalia, a string of attacks within the city center by the ragtag militia sympathizers were conducted, and the man police believed was behind the attacks was arrested. It is a charge that 28-year-old Elgiva Bwire Elias Muhammad was only too eager to admit. Appearing before Chief Magistrate Gilbert Mutembei Bwire pleaded guilty to charges of causing grievous harm to Justus Makau Mulwa and Patrick Ndolo Kinyingi. The suspect, who hails from Budalangi, also pleaded guilty to charges of being in possession of ammunition without a firearm certificate. Police had described him as a prime suspect in a series of terrorist attacks in the country, a day after 2 grenade attacks hit the capital Nairobi, leaving 1 person dead and 30 others with various degrees of injury. The self-confessed Al-Shabaab member Bwire was sentenced to life imprisonment. Finally, the case seeking court's advisory on when the next general election will be held is still pending at the High Court, with a ruling set for January. The ruling will put to rest debate and different opinions on constitutional interpretation of the next election day. Lawyers appearing before High Court argue that MPs alone cannot change the election date and there must be a referendum. Justice Isaac Lenaola, David Majanja and Mumbi Ngugi set the date after concluding the hearing of the petition filed by Kilome MP Harold Mau, Mugambi Manyara, Martin Gitonga and Professor Lawrence Gumbe, seeking a determination of the date.
In the year 2011, the Horn of Africa faced what has been termed the worst drought in 60 years. Such are the scenes that characterized the unfortunate period. Malnourished women and children, and the desperate weather-beaten faces of men too weak to provide for their families. At least 12 million people starred starvation in the face in the Horn of Africa. The biting spell that started in April reached its climax in mid-July. In northern Kenya, nearly 3 million people were affected by the crisis that weather experts attributed to insufficient rains across the country during the long rain season. It was a crisis of untold magnitude. Ethiopia, Sudan, Somalia, Djibouti, Uganda and Kenya were all affected in different ways, with the greatest brunt being borne by Somalia. The Horn of Africa nation embroiled in lawlessness, and that has known no peace for 2 decades. The international community stepped in to offer that much needed help. The severity and duration of the crisis gravely affected families from the pastoralist communities who largely rely on livestock for survival. The disturbing images drew the attention of regional leaders, with the hunger issue dominating Kenya's political agenda. It is a famine that gave birth to the Kenyans for Kenya initiative in July 2011. The noble cause, spearheaded by various organizations, aimed at mobilizing corporates and members of the public to raise 500 million shillings in 4 weeks towards relief for 3 million hungry people in northern part of Kenya. Moved by love and compassion for their brothers and sisters, Kenyans sent their generous donations to the kitty that eventually surpassed 1 billion shillings. And as the year comes to a close, the weatherman has already forecast dry weather conditions which are expected to prevail over most parts of the country, with occasional rains in Nairobi, coast and southeastern regions. But notwithstanding, Kenyans will be hoping that in the new year, the government will take seriously lessons learned during the period of the worst drought in 6 decades. Lessons that will hopefully lead to better policy decisions to put food security first and avert calamities that arise from drought. Irene Mchuma, The Year in Review 2011.
2011 proved eventful in the international arena, from the killing of Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden by U.S. forces, the fall of Libyan strongman Muammar Gaddafi after 27 years, and his subsequent killing, to the devastating earthquake in Japan. Channel 1's Angela Kibue recounts these and other events that shaped the year 2011 on the international stage.
Since 1969, Libya has known no other leader except Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, but an uprising that saw Libyans revolt against his rule abruptly cut his short tenure. It was an uprising that saw the erstwhile comrade turn their backs on him at his time of need, as they united in condemning use of violence against the popular uprising against the colonel. Inspired by the anti-authoritarian protests that swept through the Arab world, Muammar Gaddafi's death came as a surprise to many, as he was killed by his own people in his hometown of Sirte. The exact circumstances of his death remain a dispute, either killed in crossfire, summarily executed, or lynched and dragged to the streets by jubilant battle-head-headed fighters. The revolution started in Tunisia, setting off a mass street demonstration. Weeks of violent protest fueled by corruption, widespread unemployment, and lack of liberty. In Egypt, protesters inspired by the uprising in Tunisia vowed to stay on the street until the 30 years of Mubarak's government fell, to end dictatorship in their country. Protesters hit the street to demand justice. In a crackdown against anti-government protests, over 700 people were arrested throughout the country. The year 2011 also witnessed the killing of Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden, the mastermind behind various terrorist attacks. Bin Laden was slain in his luxury hideout in Pakistan in a fight with U.S. forces, ending a manhunt that spanned the frustrating decade. Osama was linked to the Kenyan bombing of the American embassy in Nairobi in 1998 that killed many and left thousands injured, the Tanzanian bombing and Ugandan bombing as well as the bombing of the Twin Towers. The year also witnessed the death of former President Frederick Chiluba, the 68-year-old leader who had ruled the Southern African country from 1991 to 2001, died at his home after suffering a seizure. Reports indicated that Chiluba had been battling acute heart and kidney problems. Frederick Chiluba was credited for turning the pages on the autocratic rule of the country's founding father, Kenneth Kaunda. North Korea, too, bid farewell to its enigmatic leader, Kim Jong-il. Jong-il, who had been in power since the death of his father in 1994, was reported to have died of a heart attack caused by overwork and stress at the age of 69. The country ended an 11-day period of official mourning, with flags being flown at half-mast at all military bases, factories, businesses, farms and public buildings. After the tearful announcement of his death, the street of Pyongyang went quiet, but thousands of people gathered the landmark in his honor. Chinese President Hu Jintao visited the North Korean embassy in Beijing to offer his condolences. The passing of Kim Jong-il may have the consequence of making the North Korean regime even more elusive to the outside world. Elsewhere, the Apple family bid farewell to their chairman and co-founder Steve Jobs. Jobs pioneered the personal computer industry, and his vision changed the way people think about technology. He had battled pancreatic cancer and several years ago had received a liver transplant. Before his death, Jobs stepped down as the chief executive of Apple Inc. and handed his reign to his longtime deputy, Tim Cook. Steve P. Jobs died at the age of 56. And in March this year, Japan's most powerful earthquake since record began struck the northeast coast, triggering a massive tsunami. Strong waves hit Japan, Myanmar and Fukushima prefectures, jamming dozens of coastal communities. Cars, ships and buildings were swept away by a wall of water after an 8.9 magnitude tremor which struck about 400 kilometers north of Tokyo. The Japanese nuclear official said pressure inside a boiling water reactor at one of the plants was running much higher than normal after a cooling system failed, and there was need to deliberately release some radioactive steam to release the pressure. After Tohoku struck, a tsunami warning was extended across the Pacific to North and South America, where many of coastal regions were evacuated. But the alert was later lifted in most parts, including the Philippines, Australia and China. And in the Queensland, the much-awaited grand royal wedding finally took place on the 29th of April this year. The wedding of Prince William and his longtime girlfriend Kate Middleton brought the world to a standstill as they tied the knot at Westminster Abbey. After the non-traditional vows were taken, where like Prince Diana, Kate opted not to say "I will obey" part of the vows and instead went with the promise to love, comfort and honor and keep the prince. The couple headed to Buckingham Palace after the church ceremony, where William and Kate kissed twice at the balcony balcony of the palace to officially announce their union to the world and become Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. The couple's wedding was watched by 2,000 friends, family and dignitaries inside the Abbey and an estimated audience of over 2 billion people around the world. But it is not all rosy in Britain, as London experienced disturbance with riots that escalated for over a week. Riots in Tottenham began after a protest over a fatal shooting by police over 29-year-old Mark Duggan. About 300 people gathered outside the police station on their high road after demonstrators demanded justice. The youth went rowdy as a double-decker bus was set on fire at the junction of High Road and Brook Street, while a convenience store was also set alight. And on a lighter note, a teenager from a poor family in the rural Philippines was declared the world's shortest man as he turned 18. Guinness World Records presented John Ray Baldwin, who is 23.6 inches tall, with a certificate at his birthday party. Baldwin is said to have stopped growing when he was 2 years. He is more than 7 centimeters shorter than the previous record holder, Khagendra Tapamagar of Nepal, who had held the record since last October. Relatives say he has difficulty standing and walking, but the community is protective of him. And finally, this year's Nobel Peace Prize was divided into 3 equal parts between Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, Layman Goboy and Takwel Kamar for their non-violent struggle for the safety of women and for women's rights to full participation in peace building. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf is Africa's first democratic elected female president. Since her inauguration in 2006, she has contributed to securing peace in Liberia, to promoting economic and social development, and to strengthening position of women. Layman mobilized the organized women across the ethnic and religious divided lines to bring the end to a long war in Liberia and to ensure women's participation in elections. She has since worked to enhance the influence of women in West Africa during and after the war, in the most trying circumstances both before and during the Arab Spring. And Takwel Kamar has played the leading part in the struggle for women's rights and for the democracy and peace in Yemen. Angela Kibue for International News.
In the crime world, has 2011 been a year of exceptions? The answer is no. I look at a few crime scenes. In Buruburu, there was a shootout that not many of us could forget. And of course, the fateful death of Wambui Kabiru, who was a journalist. Now we go over to Rufus Hunja, who takes us through the crime scenes witnessed in the country in 2011.
In 2008, at the tender age of 21 years, Samuel Kamau Wanjiru made history when he won Kenya's first ever Olympic marathon gold medal. His track record was unprecedented, and he had the promise to dominate distance running for another decade, but the fame and the money that comes with it ended up being his worst enemy. On that fateful Sunday night, it is alleged that Wanjiru jumped to death from the balcony of his palatial home in Muthaiga in Nyahururu. His mother claims he was murdered, eliciting a bitter row between her and his wife. When he was finally laid to rest, the world mourned a great marathon runner. When the U.S. government imposed sanctions on Kilome Member of Parliament Haron Mwau and his business associates over alleged involvement in drug trafficking, Mwau was lucky when the government cleared him of any wrongdoing.
I have never been involved in any criminal activities whatsoever. Even traffic, I have never been involved. So, if they have any evidence, bring it before our court.
With the recent spate of attacks by suspected Al-Shabaab militias, the presence of a grenade in the Prime Minister's office caught the government unaware. The police say the grenade was harmless, adding that there was a likelihood of an inside job among the staff. In October, a father and his son were brutally murdered by police in Kawangware while on their way to Wakulima Market to buy vegetables. Police said they were responding to an alarm call by a person in the area, but after bitter protest by family members, the policeman who shot them was arrested. In a small village called Gatura in Murang'a, 2 people were beheaded by Mungiki adherents even after the government had claimed the sect was no longer a security threat. And in October, the wrangle surrounding multi-million Boy Committee Company played out again when its chairman was shot dead in Kiambu Road. Directors of the company, which owns vast prime land in Kiambu County, are embroiled in bitter ownership wrangles that has seen several killed. Tana River district was not left out. A drunken police officer is said to have killed 4 people before he was shot dead by a fellow cop. The officer had inquired the whereabouts of his wife from his neighbors, and when they said they didn't know, he opened fire on them before a fellow officer came out and shot him. In Nairobi, Umoja Estate, former journalist Wamboi Kabiro was strangled to death by her husband, Dola, and her body locked in the bedroom. Theirs had been a love-hate relationship, and Dola was charged with murder. All these are cases that captured the attention of the public, but perhaps the most bitter was the death of Mercy Keino, a master's student at the University of Nairobi. Mercy had been invited by a friend for a private party at an exclusive apartment in Church Road, Westlands. Among those present was Juja MP William Kabogo. There were claims that Mercy had an altercation with Kabogo before leaving the party and walking towards Wayaki Way. That is the last time she was seen alive, for the following day her disfigured body was found in Wayaki Way, having been run over by several cars. A motorist later reported having seen a body tossed out to the road from a Mercedes-Benz. Director of Public Prosecutions Keriako Tobiko has now ordered fresh investigations, but whether those who murdered Mercy will ever face justice remains a mystery. Her family remains united, hoping that one day someone will pay for it.
It has been over 2 months now and the Kenyan forces have been in Somalia. Our reporter Kendagor Obadia has been there and he is here to tell us the latest on Operation Nchi.
The first day of August marked the genesis of what is now known as the Operation Nchi. A Somali ragtag militia known as the Al-Shabaab struck the coastal town of Lamu and kidnapped a French national, Marie Didieu, who was a hotel proprietor in Lamu. The attack handed Kenya a big blow in the tourism sector, as well as tainting Kenya's security image. Now, the capture of Marie Didieu and her consequential death in the hands of the Somali ragtag militia could have sent a wrong signal about Kenya's security situation along the coastal region. But the fact that this has triggered the Operation Nchi, which is now pursuing the Al-Shabaab right into their hiding in Somalia, could be the beginning of a process that will make Kenya the island of peace that it has been known to be for ages. With a history of several other kidnappings, including that of a British woman whose husband was killed during the attack, and grenade attacks in Nairobi and Kampala, Uganda, all associated with the Al-Qaeda-linked terror group, it became clear that soon the Horn of Africa would be a dreaded region if measures are not put in place to curb the terror group. That is why, on the 15th of October 2011, Kenya launched an operation intended to flush out the Al-Shabaab, dubbed the Operation Nchi. The operation took effect immediately, and by 16th October, troops had been dispatched to 3 sectors commanding the operation. The northern sector making its entry into Somalia through El Wak, and the central sector moving through Liboi, and the southern sector following the coastline of Somalia. This sector is also tasked with manning the Indian Ocean in maritime operations. By 20th of October, Kenyan troops had captured several Al-Shabaab-dominated towns. Burgavo and Raskamboni fell on the actual Mashujaa Day, while Tabda, Beliskokani fell in the first days of the operation. The Kenyan troops swiftly moved to occupy the redeemed areas and continued to make advances into the Somali territory. Soon, the occupation of the Kenyan troops of towns in Somalia drew controversy, with the Somali Federal Transitional Government President Sheikh Saif crying foul. He argued that the Kenyan troops had no right to move into Somalia. But after deliberations which saw the Somali Prime Minister come to Nairobi to resolve the matter, it was decided in a meeting with Kenya's Prime Minister Raila Odinga that the operation will be conducted in unison with the TFG forces. On sensing danger, the Al-Shabaab began retaliatory attacks in Nairobi, where 2 grenade attacks hit 2 locations in the capital city's downtown areas. Following these attacks, an Al-Shabaab sympathizer, Elgiva Bwire, a Kenyan national, was arrested and prosecuted for being in possession of assorted weapons, including hand grenades. The young man was handed life imprisonment after pleading guilty. Other subsequent grenade attacks took place in Garissa, where a church was targeted, killing 2 people and injuring several others. Another attack in Hagadera near Dadaab refugee camp targeted a vehicle carrying government officials, killing a district education officer, a school principal, and 2 other people after the vehicle was hit by a rocket-propelled grenade. Since then, there has been a series of attacks suspected to be retaliatory by the Somali Ragtag militia, targeting military trucks in which scores of soldiers had been injured in northeastern region.
Now, a look back at 2011 would not be complete without talking about those bizarre events, those stories that made the headlines because of their very unusual nature. I mean, who can forget the thousands of people from around the world who flocked to a little Tanzanian town called Loliondo in search of a miracle cure.
From Parliament to the courts and public gallery, the year 2011 is also the year that we in KBC introduced our satire segment in our Weekend Swahili Bulletin. And the taste of it was just hilarious. And here we sample some of the big ones of the year.
Hebu nikupeleke moja kwa moja hadi miondoko ya Mayenga FM huko Kisumu. Mwanadada hapa yuko ngangari. Hata Nyambane anakubaliana nami. Lakini huyu hapa bila shaka ni Malenga.
Radio Mayenga, Mato Marwa.
Wacha, sisemi kitu.
I'm perfect. I like it, I'm perfect. And I appreciate it. I'm a perfect infinitus.
Wewe ni perfect. Ushampata mchumba?
I'm very young. I've not get a man to get mad to me, but I'm not worried for that. But I know what time I'll get a man to marry me. Okay?
Sawa mrembo perfect. Labda tutamwalika Pastor Adeneji kwa maombi maalum.
Kama wangeniwacha katika wizara ya kilimo,
Allah, kwani ungefanyaje mheshimiwa?
Mambo yangekuwa tofauti.
Sawa basi, lakini hebu toboa. wewe ni nani?
Mimi ni hasla.
Allah.
Mimi ni hasla. Mimi nimetoka nyumba huko chini, nimelala njaa,
Yote 9. La 10 ni kutoka Mheshimiwa Nemesius wa Rugongo.
Na kusema ya kwamba rais wetu ndio alianzisha.
Anzisha.
Na kusema ya kwamba rais wetu ndio alianzisha.
Anzisha mheshimiwa.
Na kusema ya kwamba rais wetu ndio alianzisha.
Si neno, ilikuwaje?
Na yeye ndio alikuwa mchidani, yeye ndio alichida. Hiyo haiwezekani.
Aside from the JKJK comics, it was the theatrics of one Francis Atwoli, the Kotu brother, that stood out, and the rhetoric of one Mheshimiwa Bifwoli Wakwoli, especially this one by the Bumula MP on those who sell land.
Umechukua pesa yangu, umeenda umekula na malaya, alafu ukuje useme nitoke. Hapana, niletee ile malaya. Mimi pia nikae na yeye. Ndio nikurudishie shamba.
Atwoli's description of those eyeing the presidency was a cracker.
Why should you die with Uhuru Kenyatta kwa ajili wewe ni Mkikuyu? Uhuru is not a Mkikuyu. He has his own class. Raila Odinga pana Mjaluo. He has his own class. Musalia Mudavadi is not a Luhya. He has his own class. Yes.
In Parliament, one Mheshimiwa Mike Mbuvi Sonko was a star of the August House cast. First was the bling stunt he pulled, starring debate on the floor.
Na ukifuata tabia na mienendo ya kina Songo ndio hii. Sasa yeye anatipitisha wazi kwamba yeye ndio Songo. Kwa hivyo kumkemea, labda kama wewe ndio unataka kuwa Songo. Tabia za Songo ni kwamba ni mtu mrembeka, ambaye anavaa ngongoli, ambaye anavaa vipuli, ambaye ana suti ambaye imenyooka, na ndio tabia zake hii.
To being the comrade that Joshua Kutunyi needed in rolling heads with their mastery of Swahili to Waziri Franklin Betts' astonishment.
Na mimi sielewi kama ni Kiarabu au kama ni Kiswahili.
Ni ile tu ametumia misamiati, kwa sababu sabina ukiangalia katika kamusi ya Kiswahili ni mtu ambaye ni mlegefu. Katika lugha ya Kiingereza ni mtulezi.
And do you remember this that I can aptly call the Unga Revolution, again courtesy of Sonko? The drama by activists led by Okia Omtata in court was surely out of this world. Talk of freedom of expression.
We want an arbitration by a legitimate authority, which is the High Court. We are not going to plead to any guilty or not guilty nonsense in a magistrate's court. The age when we are using police and the courts as condoms is over.
Yes.
We need to deal with the people who stole our money, and it's a head-on confrontation, and the struggle will be fought and won on the streets of Kenya, not in the boardrooms.
And this man caught eating grass was not even aware that that was what he was doing. Just too bizarre. And what about the search for husbands?
Yes, I'm single with 2 kids, so I'm expecting to go on the other head.
Yeah, also, I'm a single. I wanted to come here so that I may also be one of the people.
Last but not least is this revelation of how desperation leads to innovation, talking of extents Kenyans are willing to go just to pass exams. And this was just mind-boggling.
This is the new...
I leave you with these moments from our Exodus to Stardom auditions.
Na 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 na. No one, no one, no one, no one, no one, no one, no one can share the bella.
Embeneza, 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 what a wada you are. Neno la muguni no kama nyama no, no, yeah.
No, yeah. No, yeah.
Just hold on. Tone it down.
Milton Yakundi for Channel 1, Year in Review.
wa milele. Joni nyote kwa Yesu kwenye uzima wa milele wa milele. Joni nyote kwa Yesu kwenye uzima wa milele. Joni nyote kwa Yesu kwenye uzima wa milele. Wa milele, wa milele. Joni nyote tushirikiane. Joni nyote.
What an incredible year 2011 has been. And I'm sure many people are thankful that the year is coming to an end.
Exactly, and many people look forward to 2012 because mainly of the elections, but we cannot forget that 2011 has also been a good year, I believe.
Well, it's
bad
had its
moments though.
Yeah, the economy could have performed better,
yeah.
but let's see how things turn out in the year beginning tomorrow.
We want to thank you so much for being a part of us here in Channel 1 in the year 2011, and we do hope you'll be with us in 2012 as well.
We make a pledge to keep covering these events for you wherever they might be happening in Kenya and elsewhere in the world. Happy New Year to you. On behalf of the team here at Channel 1, I'm Bielo Didi.
And my name is Meling Miendo. Enjoy your 2012.
And we hit the ground running with issues to do with the information and communication technology. And the ICT sector continued to be among the main agents of growth in the economy in the year 2011, with several global and regional events being staged in Kenya. For the first time, giant telecommunication provider Safaricom felt the pinch of the growing competition, especially on voice, with its profits slumping for the first time. In the hardware division, more noticeable in the mobile handset industry were the launches in smartphone and tablet segments at the World Mobile Forum in Barcelona. Kamang Bote brings you this and more stories and tells you why 2011 saw most of the business transacted in court.
Spilling over from the year 2010, the price wars in the voice segment of telecommunication were high-notch, fueled by new entrants into the market, Bharti and Esa, both Indian companies that are still trying to consolidate their hold locally. There were also casualties in both sides, with Airtel CEO Rene Meza throwing in the towel and heading to Tanzanian giant Vodacom to be replaced by Shivan Bhargava. Your sister company Aegis Services Kenya Limited went under as you terminated its contract with the company, forcing Aegis out of the Kenyan market for the cost-effective Horizon Contact Center to handle its call center services, with affected employees being asked to reapply for their positions. You, however, managed to cause ripples in the industry in 2011 after the company announced that its subscribers would now call for free when making you-to-you links from 6 in the morning to 6 in the evening, effectively making it the most enticing on-net tariff network. The competition also saw giant provider Safaricom, that had for long complained of the underpriced voice calls in the country, cut its rates to as low as 2 shillings per minute. Another indirect casualty in the price wars was the Director General of the Communication Commission of Kenya. Under his reign, Njoroge drove the industry to one of the cheapest call rates in the region and the only country applying the pure lyric model. His reappointment was quashed by the High Court after the Consumer Federation of Kenya argued that the board and the Minister of Information did not advertise the post in the reappointment, thus did not allow fair competition.
If the great post has anything to do with that, I'll be more than happy because I'll have done my part as DG in CCK.
However, the main casualty of the whole price was Safaricom, that saw its half-year profits plummet by a massive 48%. Safaricom said the dip was as a direct result of the fierce price wars, as well as the harsh operating environment, which affected their customers' disposable income.
Rising operational costs across the board, coupled with declining voice revenues as a consequence of the intense price war, has negatively impacted the entire industry.
Another important happening in the year was the broadcast frequency licensing by the regulator that would see all media stations reapply their licenses, failure to which they risk losing the licenses. The order saw the regulator and the media fight each other to the courts, with neither side relinquishing their stand.
We are not going to switch them off immediately because they have a frequency license with us which lasts up to July of every year. And they renewed the frequencies this 2011, 2012, And therefore, come July next year, we are not going to renew. We shall not accept the payments for the frequencies.
Currently, the High Court has stopped the regulator from going ahead and taking over the frequencies, but what will be the end result? Another battle between the government and the media was the allocation of the digital distribution signal to the Chinese-owned Pan-African media, with the government promising to hand over the last signal to the consortium of the local media in respect to the heavy investment in the industry. Still in the courts, internet provider Kenya Data Networks was sued by cable company Soliton Telmec over unpaid dues accumulating to over 400 million shillings. The move saw the management of KDN rush to assure all shareholders and creditors that the company was stable during the opening of the offices at the Samia Business Park.
With the announcement of a multi-million-dollar data center, a multi-million-dollar extension of our network through Uganda, and other projects that we've completed in the last weeks, it certainly doesn't look like a company that should or could be wound up.
However, the matter was settled out of court between the two companies, with Soliton Telmec agreeing to withdraw their winding up petition filed against KDN in the High Court of Kenya. Both parties also agreed to withdraw with various applications and appeals arising from the petition. On a brighter ending, the year also saw the largest number of launches in the smartphone industry during the Barcelona Mobile Congress. The year saw a competition to launch both the tablet and the 3D smartphone by all the major players. 2011 also saw the Internet Governance Forum for the first time being held in Nairobi at the United Nations Gigiri Complex.
Most of the internet security debate centers around the mobile because practically every Kenyan has access to mobile.
However, back to the courts, as competition heated up, there were a number of civil cases by companies on breach of patents. Lastly, 2011 also saw the demise of a genius accredited with the transformation of especially the smartphone segment. Apple CEO and co-founder Steve Jobs died on October the 5th, aged 56, after several years of fighting pancreatic cancer.
And moving on now, in the agricultural sector, this year has undergone various challenges, comebacks and milestones, from the maize shortage that saw the government waive 50% import duty on the commodity and closure of some milling companies, the sugar shortage that left consumers paying up to 250 shillings per 1 kg, food prices that continue to shoot, as well as the genetically modified organisms debate. My goodness, the agricultural sector was another showstopper. Our reporter Ruth Mutegi gives us more insight into the event that shaped the agricultural sector this year.
This was the situation in most supermarkets in the country. A kilogram of sugar traded at 250 shillings, perhaps the highest in the history of this country.
I'm really confused because sukari ni kitu ya muhimu sana. Lazima tu take breakfast morning. Asubuhi tunahitaji mkate, ndio hii hapa nimeshachukua, niko na maziwa lakini sukari hamna.
The Ministry of Agriculture blamed this to the rising fuel prices and shortage of cane.
We were producing January. We were producing about 56 metric tons a month. And today we are producing 20,000 a month. And these are some of the factors which are causing our sugar, to go up, Mr. Speaker.
This was so even as it emerged that Mumia Sugar Company, which has 65% stake in the market, exports 15,000 tons of sugar to the European Union annually.
Can you explain why Mumia's Sugar was able to export 15,000 metric tons of sugar to European community when actually we had a shortfall in this country?
The ministry, however, sought a tax waiver from Treasury on sugar imports to help reduce the high sugar prices. Kenyans are yet to see the outcome. In May this year, maize millers warned that the country was to experience a shortage in maize flour unless the government removed duty on imports of maize and the farmers released the stocks they were holding.
We are holding around 372,000 bags of 90 kg bag. That quantity, if it is to be released to the public, might not take more than 1 month before it is actually over. And that is why we are saying it is necessary.
This was despite the country experiencing a bumper harvest as well as exemption of duty and tax remissions on maize imports to the tune of 17.3 billion shillings in 2010.
Government spent between 2009 and 2010 in terms of duty, exemption and remissions. They did at least 17.3 billion shillings. That's a huge amount of cereals. Who ate this now?
The shortage came despite the government removing 50% import duty on the commodity earlier in the year. The Parliamentary Select Committee on Agriculture Chairman John Mututho attributed the shortage to hoarding of the commodity by millers.
We have enough food within our borders, but people who have deliberately and conveniently become merchants of death. They want to continue there, seeing people suffering.
And yet again, the consumer bore the brunt of a rise in prices of maize meal. It is around this time that the heated debate on the introduction of genetically modified organisms arose. Millers and analysts alike were of the opinion that GMOs could solve the problem of food shortage in the country. However, there were concerns about the impact of GMO crops on the health and safety of the citizens who consumed it and the environment they lived in.
We cannot import maize, which we are not sure. For this maize, our people consume this maize morning, lunch, dinner, the same maize, if it's not proper. That way, we will not be in a rush to accept maize that we are not sure of.
Through the Kenya Accreditation Service, the government gazetted the biosafety regulations that seek to regulate the cultivation, importation, and trade of genetically modified organisms in order to prevent unscrupulous importation of the GMOs into the country.
This is a very critical role, and that's why we have brought in this subject matter to be able to bring in stakeholders so that we are able to really get to carry out the screening correctly in a competent manner, so that whoever is going to use the products really get that assurance that due diligence has been taken and that the products are safe.
Kenya became the fourth country on the continent to embrace GMO technology after South Africa, Burkina Faso, and Egypt. More so, increase in prices in other commodities, especially food this year, have left many Kenyans digging deeper into their pockets to sustain themselves.
The prices are really up in a manner that we may not be able to do the shopping the way we used to do previously.
This year, the agriculture sector has been shaken so many times. Nonetheless, Kenyans have managed to go through it, albeit with a lot of expectations that next year will be better. For Business Year in Review, I'm Ruth Mutegi.
Let us now take our time and review how the economy in broad performing. And 2011 has been a difficult year characterized by high inflation rate, high food and fuel prices, a weakened shillings, and a drought that saw the Kenyans for Kenya initiative launched to help those who are suffering from the ravaging drought. It is a year that diaspora remittances hit their highest, while massive growth was also witnessed in the building and construction sector. Kendi Abao talked to economic experts to expound on the economic happenings in the country.
2011 began on a positive note. Every sector of the economy was full of optimism that the year will present quite good tidings. All economic growth projections were full of buoyancy, with several companies announcing expansion plans in the country and in the East African region. But as the year progressed, a number of challenges emerged. Challenges that forced investors to review their operations cost by either restructuring or slowing down the expansion plans. Although the inflation rate began rising in November 2010, investors and Kenyans were full of confidence that it would be contained in the coming year. But as the new year came and progressed, the rising inflation became a threat and of great concern to investors.
The maize we produce in Kenya is still priced higher than food in a lot of countries that are producing and exporting maize, including South Africa, Argentina, Brazil, places like that. Our rice is still more expensive than rice from Thailand, where we get it from. We must make sure that we're producing our food at a price lower than the rest of the world.
A lot of our inputs are actually imported,
And the result is that we're actually earning more, but we're also paying more for our inputs. So, you know, the actual situation in terms of agricultural exporting companies is not quite as good as it would appear at first sight.
Another challenge in the year was the high rise in commodity prices, including fuel. As 2010 was ending, the government saw it fit to have ERC regulate fuel prices to carbon cartels and protect Kenyans from extremely high fuel prices. This, however, was not felt in the year as ERC continued to increase fuel prices month after month, with the Parliamentary Committee on Energy calling for the disbandment of the commission.
Because so much of our economy depends on transport, this obviously has meant that, you know, for the common one Nchi, the rise in the price of fuel in Kenya has been, you know, disastrous. And it's gone up very, very substantially. It's gone up by much more than, let's say, the fall in the value of the shilling even. You know, because at its worst possible moment, the fall in the value of the shilling was about 28%. But let's say the price of diesel, the price of petrol has gone up by a much greater factor than that.
We have seen reports, and we've received reports about the marketing system of fuel in Kenya, saying it's inefficient, and a lot could be done to bring down costs of distribution within our country. And the market structure itself, are there enough players, and is competition in such a way that it's actually assisting the consumer?
Early in the year, the country experienced massive drought in several parts of the country, necessitating Kenyans coming together to help those suffering under hunger pangs through the Kenyans for Kenya initiative. The Kenya shilling depreciated to an all-time low of 107 shillings in October against the dollar. The depreciation was fueled by the import bill.
The central bank was focusing a lot on safeguarding growth, and that's why the central bank rate was under 10, if you like, for the first half of the year. They didn't want to stifle credit and thereby stifle growth, because credit has been one of the channels through which growth in the modern sector was transmitted.
It is against the backdrop of all these factors that the 2011 economic growth is projected to range between 4 and 4.5. This growth will be driven by the massive growth witnessed in the building and construction sector, the tourism sector, despite the insecurity setbacks in Lamu and Isiolo. Manufacturing and ICT will also immensely contribute to the growth.
With this growth, you've got to remember, will it be translated into the average Kenyan having more in his pocket? The answer is no. Some Kenyans will have. They will have more money in their pocket, and they'll have more assets at the end of this year than last year. But the average Kenyan will not.
Although we are producing less of tea and less of coffee because of weather and other reasons, when you look at the value, the money which is coming in as a result of that, it's still better than it was last year.
The outlook for 2012 is promising, and a combination of trends could contribute to ensure positive prospects in the short term to medium term. The strengthening of the shilling is a plus that is to be strongly felt in the coming year. The strengthening of the EAC integration process and the call for eradication of trade barriers is another aspect to watch in the coming year.
Although 2011 has been termed as a volatile year, the year ends with some sense of optimism that 2012 will present better terms. The strengthening of the Kenya shilling to an average of 85 shillings against the dollar and the reduction of fuel prices in the month of December makes the year end on a positive note. Reporting for Business Year in Review, I am Kendi Abuao.
During the fourth quarter of last year, Parliament enacted the Price Control Act that could see the government regulate the price of basic commodities. The move was highly welcomed by Kenyans. It saw the Energy Regulatory Commission begin setting pump price ceilings in December. However, this year saw a price increment every mid-month when the Energy Regulatory Commission announced new fuel pump prices. In the fourth quarter of this year, Kenyans were of the opinion that the Commission was not helping the fuel situation. This saw the Parliamentary Select Committee on Energy call for the disbandment of the Energy Regulatory Commission.
That every time the ERC steps forward to say something, it is always to the effect that fuel increases are going to be effected. This is not what is expected of this commission. And I think the message has to go out very clearly and loudly the time has come when we as Parliament must really look at it again and see if indeed there is need to continue having the ERC.
According to the Commission, high international cost of crude oil and a weak shilling was responsible for the increase in fuel pump prices. However, this came to haunt the Commission in November when the Energy Regulatory Commission released new pump prices, opting to adjust them upwards when all indications were that it could fall. The shilling had recovered on the dollar, while international cost of mud and crude oil, which is used in Kenya, had slightly reduced.
On the area of foreign exchange, indeed it has already worked. We have seen the shilling go to the levels where it was more than a year ago, and we are happy about that.
Niko na shida sana kwa vile hii bei ya mafuta kama inapanda namna hii. Mzee kama mimi hata jisaidia. Kwa vile sasa angalia mafuta hata inakuwa 100.
Industrial action also featured in the energy sector. At the beginning of the year, there was a strike by the Kenya Trade Allied Workers Union, which paralyzed operations in parts of the country, albeit for several hours. The union was agitating for better terms. In the second half of the year, a nationwide strike by the Kenya Trade and Allied Workers Union was called by the union of a stalled collective bargaining agreement.
There will be no power at all in this country. That is going to be Operation Darkness. If the parties meet and there will be no way forward on the discussion, then we shall proceed on with the strike tomorrow.
This was averted after the Ministry of Labour intervened. However, the most notable event in the energy sector was the return of power rationing after a 2-year break. The Kenya Power Lighting Company, which later rebranded to Kenya Power, argued that scheduled power was the only solution to low electricity supply in the country.
The country is experiencing unprecedented high petroleum prices and electricity tariffs. In addition, certain electricity consumers, including Nairobi's industrial area, have been experiencing limited power rationing due to inadequate generation capacity. This inadequacy has been caused by delays in the implementation of planned generation projects.
By the way, this is between 6:40 and 9:30. That is about 2 hours and 50 minutes. That is the time when we get maximum power requirement.
The power rationing was majorly attributed to effects of drought at the beginning of the year, which saw water levels in hydro dams reduce.
It is true that we encourage most of the customers, especially industrial, if they have heavy use, they can actually use it, not at the peak time. Interrupting domestic customers at that time puts them at a very serious compromise in terms of meeting their requirements.
Closure of some hydro dams for renovation and optimization were also given as reasons. Corruption allegations against KenGen Managing Director Eddie Njoroge also emerged in the year. A local monthly magazine claimed Njoroge conspired with Anglo-leasing mastermind Deepak Kamani to steal 8 billion shillings from the government through a deal involving a geothermal wellhead. The KenGen Managing Director, however, denied the claims.
When somebody comes in and says, yes, this is my presentation, I can be able to do it, we did make direct procurement.
This was done in a very open and transparent manner, without anything hidden from anybody. It was open to all in an international tender.
Well, these are some of the events in the energy sector.
Well, men, oh men, and that's where we call it a night. Thank you very much. You have been watching the 2011 edition of BizWeek, where we specialized on all the sectors of the economy, how they fared, and also we are glad that you watched this program throughout this year. We hope to have the same company come next year, that is 2012. I am O'Brien Kimani. Many thanks for joining us, and do have yourself a lovely 2012 ahead of you. And as I always tell you, have yourself a prosperous and a profitable 2012.